We are continuing our study of the Old Testament. My name is Dr. Mark Gregory. I am a professor at Piedmont International University, and these videos are companion videos, supplemental material for the course requirements and course material. So today we're going to be focusing on Exodus in particular. We have just completed a work on Genesis, so that prepares us for what's going to happen in Exodus. Exodus is the Greek name, meaning literally exodus or departure. That seems self-evident. But in the Hebrew, it's Wa'elah Shemot. These are the names of the sons of Israel. And so there's the recounting of the list of the names that are found here. And you'll see some other information that I've given you on the slide. Quickly looking at Exodus from something of a larger view, there are four primary divisions or parts in sequence. Chapters 1 through 13. We have the Egyptian oppression and deliverance, including the 10 plagues. Chapters 14 through 18, we have the departure to Sinai. Chapters 19 through 34, the children of Israel are at Sinai. They are being given the law by God through Moses. And then in chapters 35 through 40, we have the building and the use of the tabernacle, the instructions related to the use of the tabernacle. A few major themes in the book of Exodus, among many, but these are evident: the deliverance of the Hebrew people, the formation of the people known as Israel, and the delivery of the law, which becomes the Mosaic covenant, and that has significance throughout the remainder of the Old Testament. In chapter 1, we have the oppression of Israel. Joseph has died. This is a turning point. A new king, a new Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph and began to oppress the Hebrews, and the oppression upon the Hebrew sons. In chapter 2, now we have the character Moses introduced. You may remember the story. He was born and hidden in a basket on the river, retrieved by the Pharaoh's daughter, grows into adulthood, and kills an Egyptian who is beating a Hebrew, and as a result, the Pharaoh sought to kill Moses, who then had to flee to Midian. There he meets Zipporah, the daughter of Ruel, who is also known as Jethro, and spends 40 years in the wilderness here. Then we have the call of Moses. At the end of that time, God spoke to Moses in a profound way, the burning bush experience, and revealed to Moses his own personal name, which is Yahweh, meaning I am who I am, or it can be translated in other ways as you see. In chapter 4, Moses does what we so often typically do. We resist the call of God upon our lives. And so there are objections to the call. In the Old Testament, the prophetic call is often seen very clearly in a form that's listed with the divine encounter, the call or the commission, the resistance of the prophet, the confirmation that God gives, and the signs that God then reveals to confirm that. So Moses does what we typically do. Says, I don't think this is going to work, Lord. What if they won't listen? I can't speak very well. And the Lord, of course, overturns those objections. And Moses does respond and is obedient. Chapters 5 through 7 are the encounters with Pharaoh. There are 2 encounters listed in these chapters. The first one does not go well for the children of Israel. They have increased work. And then in the second encounter in chapter 7, this is where the staff turns to a serpent. And Pharaoh's heart is hardened. That's going to be a recurrent theme through the plague cycle that we will see. Who is this Pharaoh? If we use the date of 1446 for the Exodus, which I think is an accurate date, then we can think about the 18th dynasty of the Egyptian dynasties. This Pharaoh had a considerably long rule. Moses' exile began in about 1486 and was 40 years in the wilderness. The best candidate for that earlier Pharaoh was going to be Thutmose III as the one who sought the life of Moses. But he died in 1450, allowing then Moses to return to Egypt. His successor was Amenhotep II, and I believe that there is a great deal of validity in accepting Amenhotep II as the Pharaoh of the Exodus and the one whose heart was hardened. Chapters 7 through 11 detail for us the plagues. And we see 10 of those, beginning with first the Nile, which turns to blood. The fish die. The Nile becomes foul. But Pharaoh's heart is stubborn. The second plague is that of the frogs in chapter 8. This is that famous, let my people go. And again, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The third plague was that of lice. And yet again, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The plague of flies being the fourth plague, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The plague of beasts, again, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And you see the descriptions that I'm giving you. Certainly you can go back and review the slides. The sixth plague, the plague on boils on man and beast. Pharaoh's heart was hardened in verse 12. The plague of hail. Pharaoh's heart was hardened in verse 35. The plague of locust. Pharaoh's heart was hardened in 20. The plague of darkness. Pharaoh's heart, yet again, was hardened in verse 27. The plague of the death of the firstborn begins the 10th and the final plague. And while Pharaoh's heart was hardened, note that in fact this event was fulfilled in chapter 12, which did lead to the Israelites being able to go. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 28, gives us the description of the Passover, the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which became a pivotal feast in the history of Israel, continues even to this day. 29 through 36 of chapter 12, Passover plague and the departure of the firstborn, in fact, were struck down, and they began their departure. Verses 34 and 37 tell us that they journeyed from Ramses to Sukkoth, 600,000 plus women and children. So the Lord brought the sons of Israel out of the land. Some observations about plagues. There's a general form of the encounters in the plagues. There's the Lord's command to Moses. There's the encounter with Pharaoh, the request that is given, the commencement of the plague, the occurrence of the plague actually begins, the reaction, and then the resistance. There is some commonality with all of the plagues in these observations. So the progression of the plagues shows increasing severity and increasing distress by Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. Interestingly, the magicians could duplicate some of the plagues, but were unable to continue in the contest. So what are the views concerning the plagues? There have been a number of views given over the years. I'll list for you 4 primary views. One indication by some is that a comet passed close twice during the 2nd millennium BC, perhaps accounting for the parting of the Red Sea. So the anomaly of the comet and the effect of the comet upon the Earth's gravitation and direct effect even upon the sea. Obviously, we don't think that that's an adequate explanation, but some have attempted to provide that. Second, seasonal anomalies of the Nile and the geographical environment. There certainly is some validity to understanding the seasonal varieties of things that would happen with the Nile. So Greta Hort argues that the first 9 plagues were due to an elevated flood stage, thus resulting in silt stains, algae, the oxidization being decreased in the water, increased insect activity, diseases, and so forth. But with all of these, ultimately one of the questions is the timing. How does the Lord do it exactly when he says he's going to do it? The third is that each of the plagues are a polemic of sorts, an accusation or antagonizing of the Egyptian gods. And there certainly was the overtones of this. I think that we can draw that conclusion that the plagues showed clearly God's victory over the Egyptian gods. And you see the correlations that are given here with this view. The fourth, of course, is the one that we identify with, and this is the miraculous perspective, that God performed a number of miracles timed exactly for maximum impact. He secured the deliverance and did so used any combination of natural events that were unusual in many ways, but especially in their timing to accomplish his purpose. The plagues were clearly divine interventions on the part of God to accomplish what God desired for his people. We put the date of the Exodus at 1446, and there are a number of reasons for that. One of the first and primary reasons is what we call the primacy of the text. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1 says that the Exodus took place 480 years before the 4th year of Solomon's reign, when he began to build the temple. And we know when Solomon began, we know when his 4th year was in the building of the temple. 480 years before that puts us exactly at 1446. 46, 47. In Judges 11, Jephthah, who was one of the major judges, indicated that Israel had been in Canaan for about 300 years. And if we date Jephthah where we think we can date him, then you are able to put the conquest at the right spot at about 1406, 40 years before that at 1446. So again, that biblical chronology seems to hold up quite well. The Semite population is shown to have existed in Avaris, in Goshen, and there is a population dating there, a demographic that shows a dramatic evacuation of the Semite population during that time. Incidentally, there are forth some significant grave excavations which previous and correlating to the edict of the Pharaoh to kill all the male children shows an unusual amount of female remains. Kind of an interesting twist on some of the demographics related to grave excavations. Conquest records, such as at Jericho, seems to indicate clearly that we're looking at the end of the 15th century for the conquest. Hatzor shows evidence of a conquest at that same time, one of the cities that was conquered. The Amarna tablets also give us some indication that there are a group of people known as the Habiru or Apiru, note the similarity to Hebrew, that were existing in Israel at the time that would be appropriate for this. There is a secondary dating that some people refer to called the late date for the Exodus, and that is approximately 1250 or so. Some people will put it at 1225, but the primary reason for that is based upon the use of the name of Ramses, which does not necessarily validate that date, since the name Ramses would have been known at an earlier time. There's other incidental information that I'll just let you look through on the slides and won't take time to look at in any depth. The Merneptah Stele is a great example where the Pharaoh talks about a group of people known as Israel, and he identifies them as being existent and a little bit troublesome, and that's around 1220. So previous to that, Israel had made its entrance into the land and established themselves. Chapter 13, this is the Exodus account, leading them not by the way of the Philistines, but more likely through the Red Sea than through the southern route. Chapter 14 is the Red Sea experience, which is powerful. Chapter 15, the Song of Moses, recounting that. Here's some information about the Exodus journey, 3 possible routes, the northern, the middle route, and the southern route. The Lord told him not to use the northern route. The southern route was known as a route for escaping slaves, and tends to identify the Jebel Musa as perhaps the area where, in fact, Sinai actually is. A monastery is located there even to this day. Chapter 16, the grumbling motif begins, and that's going to occur throughout Exodus, and we'll see that pick up again in Numbers. 17, some interesting side notes related to the need for water, the battle for Amalek, etc. Chapter 18, with Jethro, the division of responsibility, and they arrived then at Sinai in chapter 19. Chapter 20, 10 Commandments, the book of the law, chapters 20 through 24. And there are some parallels between the laws that are here with the suzerainty treaties known from the second millennium, which I think gives us some confirmation that the timing is right, the setting is right culturally. We're in pretty good shape there. Chapter 20 through 23, the book of the covenant. Note the reference in 24:7 to that particular name. 2 types of laws, the absolute or apodictic, and the casuistic or conditional. Chapters 25 through 31 and 35 through 40, the ceremonial law. And then in 35 through 40, the building and use of the tabernacle. At times called the tent of meeting, but it was a movable dwelling with an outer court, holy place, and holy of holies. That gets us quickly through the book of Exodus. Again, you see kind of the major divisions that are found there, the major movements of the Israelite people, the startup in the first part of the book, the deliverance, and then the time at Sinai, and the latter part of the book detailing tabernacle and the use of the tabernacle. That'll get us done for this section.